It's Rely, a new tampon from Procter & Gamble.
Unbreakable miracle crackers are for everyone, even the little guys.
The game is called lawn darts.
The 1970s were a bold time for innovation, but not every invention proved to be safe or lasting. Some of the era's creations turned out to be downright dangerous, ranging from poisonous toys to risky home appliances. From lawn darts that turned backyards into danger zones, to diet pills with deadly side effects, and even radioactive materials used in construction, many of these inventions were eventually banned for public safety. It's Memory Surge. My name is Kevin, and today we're taking a look at 30 most dangerous inventions from the 1970s that could kill you. Let's dive right in after you subscribe, of course. Remember this simple but famous toy with two hard acrylic balls attached to a string? They were called clackers. They didn't do anything special, just two balls dangling from a string. The whole point was to swing them up and down until they collided into each other in a rapid, rhythmic clack overhead. Looks fun, doesn't it? The problem was that kids didn't always have control of this partial weapon, and it could slip out of their grip and another kid could take a hard acrylic ball to the face. In some cases, the balls could shatter mid-air, sending shards flying, which was also dangerous to both the user and those around. Kids ended up in the ER with facial cuts, eye injuries, and other problems. And if the clackers didn't take you out, then maybe a good round of lawn darts would finish the job. Lawn darts were also called jarts.
The game is called lawn darts.
They were essentially giant steel darts, about a foot long, and equipped with a weighted needle-sharp tip. To play the game, you had to toss the dart into the air and try to land it inside a plastic hoop on the grass. While the rules were simple and the hoop area was clear, you'd be surprised how players completely missed the mark, throwing the dart off course completely and injuring anyone in its path. Lawn dart injuries were very serious. We are talking skull fractures and fatal injuries. Interestingly, they were a staple in backyard barbecues in the 70s. How about the little diet pill that helped you lose weight fast so that you could fit into those jeans and bikinis before the summer? Phenfluramine diet pills were one capsule that sold in millions, as many were eager to shed their excess weight quickly without spending months dancing to Jane Fonda's workout routines. The pills worked by altering serotonin levels to suppress one's appetite, allowing you shed weight like crazy. Unfortunately, phenfluramine was quietly breaking hearts. That is to say, they were damaging heart valves and causing pulmonary hypertension. It wasn't until the 90s that the FDA pulled the plug on the magic pill. What about the crazy electric belts for weight loss, which looked straight out of a sci-fi movie? Once you secured it around your waist and turned it on, the belt would vibrate and heat up the midsection, melting the fat away. At least that's what the ads say. They often used the term zap fat away, except that the belt didn't melt fat. Rather, it caused burns, nerve damage, and painful electrical shocks when worn for too long. While marketed as a futuristic technology, it almost became a very dangerous tool. If you want to talk about trusting the wrong products so easily, then the Tris flame retardant should be at the top of the list. The compound was used to make children's pajamas in the 70s. It promises to protect children from catching fire when exposed to open flame, such as a candle or gas heater. This seemed like a good deal until you found out that Tris was a mutagenic carcinogen that absorbed directly through the skin with ease. That means kids wearing these cozy sleepers were getting a thorough chemical soak each night. When its toxic traits were discovered, the 90s were immediately pulled out of the market. When you thought the 70s couldn't get any crazier, some dangerous ideas were perfectly disguised as helpful technology, one of which was the X-ray shoe fitting machine. You see, shoes across America once featured these glowing devices where kids would slip their feet in and watch their bones wiggle in real time. These X-ray machines in shoe stores were exposing kids' feet to heavy doses of radiation, all for the perfect shoe size. Even edibles were not left out of the insanity. Cattles were pumped full of artificial hormones to help them grow faster and bigger, but the long-term effects were pretty dangerous. The cattle were termed unregulated hormone beef, which may be tasty and in large quantity, enough to meet the growing demands, but the long-term effects on the human body often included hormonal imbalances, possible cancer links, and reproductive issues. The next invention on the list is probably one of the most barbaric of the era. It revealed that kids just couldn't catch a break in the 70s. In the era of fashion, music, and rebellious attitude, certain researchers and so-called behavioral scientists pushed the idea that electric shock therapy could be used to train your kids to quit their bad behaviors. How did it work? The invention came in the form of shock collars for kids, which they wore around their necks, similar to canines. They were also recommended for kids diagnosed with impairments such as autism or ADHD. The collars delivered a mild to moderate zap of electric shock when a child disobeyed, threw tantrums, or engaged in self-harming behaviors. It was marketed as a tool used for behavior modification and was actually tested in schools and institutions. This continued until the 2000s before numerous legal battles and public outcry led to the stoppage of the collars. It worked pretty well in its era and improved discipline, but at the cost of training guinea pigs rather than kids. Here's something to take away that bitter taste in your mouth. How about some candy cigarettes? Yes, they did exist way back in the 70s and were a fancy alternative for those who loved the coolness of smoking and wanted to appear like one, but just didn't care for the nicotine taste. Everyone was smoking candy cigarettes, and they were sold in corner stores, ice cream trucks, movie theater snack counters, and malls. They weren't exactly real cigarettes. They were made from sugar sticks or gum, and when puffed, the powdered sugar gave the fake smoke effect. They actually looked like real cigarettes, and kids who had these cigarettes on them were the coolest in school. Some brands, like Lucky Lights and King's Candy, took imagination to the limit by adding a red-tipped end to resemble burning tobacco. Candy cigarettes directly targeted kids, and to make things even worse, they came in packaging that was identical to real cigarette brands. The problem with this was that research showed that kids who played with candy cigarettes were twice as likely to start smoking the real nicotine cigarettes by the time they were teenagers. It was no surprise when countries started banning them from distribution. Lead-based paint was also just as dangerous. It was bright, glossy, and durable. Because of that, it was used to paint baby cribs, toys, windows, doors, and kitchen cabinets. However, when the paint gets old and starts to chip and flake, it becomes insanely toxic. Kids were the most vulnerable. According to reports, toddlers experienced more toxicity as they usually put everything in their mouths. Lead exposure led to brain damage, developmental delays, and irreversible behavioral issues. But back then, no one even batted an eye when they saw a kid gnawing on a painted windowsill. The manufacturers sold the paint as childproof. And if explosive fireworks weren't enough hazards to people and the environment, lead gasoline also contributed to environmental issues that led to severe poisoning and developmental problems in kids. In the 70s, lead gasoline was used as fuel in cars and other machines. Unfortunately, it was extremely toxic, and kids were more exposed to it than adults, leading to several behavioral problems and brain malfunction. Lead gasoline was only phased out in 1975 after the Clean Air Act was enacted. Kids' toys were also different back then. The 70s electric shock toys were every child's dream. Yes, that toy really zapped you with a few volts. The game of truth or zap often left a few kids with real burns and paranoia. The jolt of electricity was apparently acceptable fun, but was always painful, even more so to watch. While we are on the subject of dangerous compounds, let us not forget one of the most tragic pharmaceutical disasters in modern history, thalidomide. Its use dates back to the late 50s, but its horrific legacy takes us through to the 70s, where lawsuits and bans on the substance became worldwide. When thalidomide was manufactured, it was originally sold as a miracle drug that treated morning sickness in pregnant women. It seemed to work wonders as many women reported its effectiveness. Nothing prepared them for what came next. When the delivery dates arrived, there were massive birth defects in over 10,000 children. Kids were born with missing limbs, malformed organs, and severe developmental issues. The drug was immediately banned in the US, but distributions continued in other countries well after the 70s, though they are used to treat other things and are only administered under prescription. Looks like we saved the best for last, because this next invention was certainly the most dangerous way to encourage learning in school. You may have heard of the unregulated DIY chemistry sets of the 70s, but did you know how dangerous these chemistry sets were? They weren't just plastic beakers with baking soda, as some were meant to believe. These kits were advanced, especially those from brands such as Gilbert and Chemcraft. Some came with alcohol, burners, glass containers, real chemicals like potassium permanganate, ammonium nitrate, sulfur, and in rare cases, uranium ore. One particular kit called the Gilbert U-238 Atomic Energy Lab came with an actual Geiger counter and a few radioactive materials, though this rare piece was immediately retracted from the market before the 70s. But other kits were left in circulation. Some users experienced burns, sudden explosions, and even inhaled toxic fumes during use. Luckily, various standard organizations stepped in to stop the distribution of these dangerous chemistry sets, and replace them with inert ones. Did you ever buy plastic baby bottles with BPA for your little one? Even babies weren't safe from the unchecked inventions of that era. Plastic baby bottles with bisphenol A suddenly became popular, probably because the chemical helped to make plastics shatterproof. This helped durability, but the chemical contained in the bottle acted like estrogen, potentially disrupting your child's hormones and development while increasing the risk of cancer. It was decades before BPA-free bottles were invented. If you thought that was scary, imagine voluntarily bathing in radiation. But why would anyone do that? You see, there was a time when radon-infused health products were sold in the 70s, under the promise that radiation was good for you. Suddenly, radon spas were common, and radioactive water jugs were sold in shops. People were paying to expose themselves to a gas that caused cancer, thinking that it cured ailments in the body and boosted vitality. It was the error of the century and a dangerous one. While babies were at risk in cribs, teens and young adults were targeted by cigarette ads on TV. The smooth voices, rugged cowboys, and women in glamorous poses were all propaganda used to make smoking look cool. Of course, back then, many were naive and uninformed about cigarettes being the cause of cancer, heart disease, and lung issues. It wasn't until 1971 that these ads were finally banned from TV and radio. Mothers in the 70s loved this convenient invention, called the Dropside cribs, available in nurseries. It made the process of changing baby diapers in the nursery stress-free. You could easily slide the side down for diaper changes or snuggles, but this convenience quickly turned deadly. The moving part could detach, malfunction, or even trap babies between the slats and causing them to suffocate. The unsafe cribs with drop sides definitely had to go, but had already caused hundreds of casualties. A fascinating part of the 70s was that most people were smokers. Because of that, smoking was allowed everywhere, including smoking on airplanes. You'd light up a stick of cigarette mid-flight and puff away at almost 30,000 feet. Ashtrays were available on the armrest. However, the cabin air was recycled, so everyone, both smokers and non-smokers, got a taste of secondhand smoke. Years later, smoking on airlines and even in public places was banned for health reasons. If you worked in the factories or power plants back then, chances were you were in close contact with PCBs. Polychlorinated biphenyls were oily chemical compounds designed by industries for cooling electrical equipment, insulating heavy machinery, and keeping things running at optimum levels. The problem was when the chemical leaked into the environment, it turned toxic very fast. They don't break down easily, and they get into the soil, rivers, and plants and become carcinogenic. The chemical was banned in 1979 for the damage it caused. Back then, if your home was cool in the summer and your fridge purred along like a dream, you had Freon to thank for that. These CFCs were the gases used in air conditioners, freezers, and aerosol cans. It was an advanced technology at that time, at least until scientists noticed how it contributed to the thinning of the ozone layer above us. The use of these gases punched holes in the ozone layer, allowing harmful UV rays which cause skin cancer and global warming. The effects of these gases are still felt today, even though they have long phased out. Meanwhile, every household had a trusty mercury thermometer tucked into a medicine cabinet. If you were sick, Mom would shake the thermometer and stick it under your tongue and then squint at the silver line to check the temperature. It seemed harmless enough in those days, until it broke and the tiny mercury droplets scattered across the floor. Mercury exposure damaged the nervous system and contaminated the environment. Over time, these dangerous mercury types were replaced with newer versions of thermometers without mercury. Remember the infamous Relay tampons introduced as the ultra-absorbent game-changer for feminine hygiene and comfort? Well, they delivered something completely different and life-threatening. Many users experienced toxic shock syndrome as the material aided bacterial overgrowth, which landed many women in the hospital or worse. The FDA was quick to track the deaths and infections to this product, saving many female lives. You are probably familiar with DDT, the pesticide that kills bugs on the farms, but also managed to find its poisonous self in our food and water. Farmers loved to spray this chemical in the 70s because it took care of every pest, from mosquitoes to beetles. However, the chemicals flowed into the general water supplies and were linked to cancer, miscarriages, and environmental damage. While farmers are more aware today of the effects, no one knew about them in the 70s, and many paid with their lives. If you wanted a glow in the 70s, the sun wasn't your only option. There were also artificial tanning beds, booths with UV radiation that promised a nicely even bronze body all year long. You stepped in normal and stepped out with a crispy tan. What people didn't realize at that time was that the rays were carcinogenic and increased the risk of melanoma. Thankfully, they were banned and heavily restricted, as no skin tan was worth the risk. What about those fancy hair dyes with coal tar? Back then, if you wanted a deep auburn hair color or the popular Farrah Fawcett feathered glow, all you had to do was grab a box of dye, some of which contained coal tar derivatives, the byproducts of coal processing. The problem was you were at risk of cancer, as this dye was highly carcinogenic and had little to no regulation on the ingredients, so customers were rolling the dice on each application without knowing. Now, how about the silent killer, asbestos insulation? This wasn't a toy, rather, it was everywhere on the walls, ceilings, and floor tiles of your home. In the 70s, this material was considered cutting edge and was used a lot by contractors and homeowners. What they didn't know at that time was that asbestos released microscopic fibers into the air, which, when inhaled over time, could cause lung cancer, asbestosis, and even developmental problems in kids. It took years before the general public became aware of this danger. Now here's something you may be familiar with, a mini hammock. These child-sized hammocks were often sold without spreader bars, therefore earning the name death hammock. They'd twist and wrap around a child's neck or body as they tried to climb in, leading to suffocation or fatal strangulation. As simple as it looked, this hanging trap was responsible for multiple child deaths before laws were made to regulate its use. And then came the era of healthy diet choices. One of the first big artificial sweeteners found in diet sodas and low-calorie desserts was cyclamates. They used to be popular as they gave people a sugar-free option for desserts, drinks, and other food types. But with deeper research, it was found that cyclamates caused bladder cancer in lab animals. Though there were no human casualties, it definitely had the potential to mutate DNA. The US banned them from the market in 1970, though they are still used in some countries. Of course, you couldn't discuss dangerous inventions of the 70s without including fireworks sold without regulation. Back then, fireworks were sold to anyone. No age checks, no safety standards, and certainly no warnings. Kids just want to have fun, but most of them don't fully understand what they are buying or how dangerous it is. The results were disturbing. Thousands of kids ended up with deep burns, lost fingers, and in some cases, even blindness. From backyard pranks to school misdemeanors, fireworks made examples of many lives. Thanks to regulations and laws, accidents from fireworks have greatly reduced over the years. Which of these inventions do you think is the most dangerous? Let us know in the comments. And if we missed anyone, feel free to share in the comments. We'd like to hear your story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so that you don't miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching. Till next time.